Hello everybody and welcome back, and in this tutorial we will start coding our basic authentication brute forcer, and this will be the last video in this ethical hacking beginner to advanced course. Now after we finish this you will have 25 plus hours of ethical hacking videos where you can learn everything from basics to later a little bit more advanced stuff. Now basically right now, as I said, we want to code the brute forcer in Python. So let us first see what basic authentication is. So let us go on our terminal and just open up our burp suite. So I'll have to show you what a basic authentication example looks like. So every time you go here, let me just close this from the previous video, and for example open up my router right here. It will open up this window which will require the username and password. So this is the example of a basic authentication. Now how do you know it's basic authentication? Well, simply I will just show you right now. As you can see right here, it doesn't, if you do not specify username and password to say protected object, this object on the wrong page server is protected. So right now, in order for us to see that it really is basic authentication, we will open up our burp suite and we will inspect our packet before we actually start coding our brute forcer. So open the burp suite. This should take a few seconds, and right after you open it we need to do the regular stuff such as turning the intercept off and also using the burp suite as proxy in our Firefox. So right here go intercept off for now. Then right here you go to your three lines right here, go to preferences. Now if you skipped the website penetration testing section you will not know how to do this, that's why I'm explaining once again. So scroll down all the way to the lower part where it says network proxy, click on the settings right here, and here instead of the no proxy you want to set up manual proxy configuration, which will be HTTP proxy on your local host at port 8080. You want to make sure to select all of these to be the same and also use SOX 5 V5, pardon me. So we want to use SOX 5. Click here OK, and now we are good to go. So right now if I just go right here and turn the intercept back on and go right here and refresh this page, now you will see it will ask us for a packet. We want to forward this packet. Right now it will prompt us for the username and password, so we can type here anything. It doesn't really matter. We click here OK, and here we have the packet where we actually send the authentication for that page. As we can see, we know that it is basic authentication, as it says in the lower part, authentication, or pardon me, authorization basic. So this is the authorization that we will actually try to brute force. So this program will work for every website or every login page or every router that uses basic authentication. Now this is the most simple use of it. So we will try to code the program that will actually use multiple threads in order to perform the bruteforcing. After that we will add some of the parsing options with opt parser, which will actually specify the options in the sys argument. Now what I mean by that is, let me just close this right now. Since we do not need the burp suite anymore, I just wanted to show you this, what it looks like. And right here we can set back the preferences to be no proxy, since we will not really be needing burp suite anymore. We only used it in order for me to show you, so just set everything back as normal and we can close this page. Now what I mean we will be setting up options, I mean, for example, if you use Mac Changer, it will ask you for the options or for the available options for this device, or basically for this program. So if you just type here macchanger.help, it will say you need to specify these options in order for it to perform these tasks right here. So we will try to code something similar to this. We will add our own options and we will actually say which option does what, and then we will be able to run our program. So right here, let us make a directory which is called, for example, brute forcer, and let's change our directory to the brute forcer. Here we do not have anything since we didn't code anything yet, but let us nano our basic authentication.py. So nano basic authentication.py. Now a little bit long name, but it doesn't really matter. You can call it anything you want, as usual. Let us specify the path to our Python. And let us see what we really need to perform in order to code this properly. So we will actually need to import the threading library, since we are using the threads in order to brute force. We will also need to import the sys library, which allows us to actually select the options to be as in the MacChanger program, for example. What we will need to do, we will need a file that will contain all the password lists that we will actually use in order to brute force. That is also something that we will need. What we will also need, basically we can add some additional options, such as for example banner for our program, and we also need the usage in order for users to know how they can use our program. So let us start off with this. So let us first, in order for us to actually send anything over the internet, whether it is basic authentication or sending packets or this or that, we need to import the requests library. That library allows us to actually send packets and send usernames and passwords with a simple one-line command. So let us import requests. Then let us import threading, but let us import it a little bit different. So from threading, import thread. We also need to import sys, as I said before. In order for us to parse the arguments, we need to import, well, from now on, that will actually be it, sys, so we can actually use the system arguments. And to parse the options, we actually need to import the getOpt library. So import, oops. Now we used all of these libraries instead of this one, so you will be not familiar with this library, but it is not that hard. We basically have a few lines with it, so it won't really present any problem. And right now, let us see what we can actually do in order to make our program work. So let us actually add a banner to our program so users get notified, it looks prettier, and that is very simple to do. Let us add a function called banner. It will not take any arguments, we will just call it, and we can print something that looks, well, that looks pretty, so we can just go like, I don't know, we can just type here hashes, then we print once again, print something like this, for example, our basic brute forcer. It doesn't really matter. You can name it anything you want. This is just so it looks a little bit prettier, so add the double quotes at the end. And here let's print another row of the hashes. So this is what I call a simple banner, and in order for us to run it, you can just type here banner and save this file and check out if it works. Now this is something that we want to run, for example, at the beginning of every program, so it actually prints out this banner, which can be a little bit prettier, but it doesn't matter in our case. So let us continue. This is not really anything important. So right now what we actually want to do is let us actually code the function where we'll actually parse our arguments. So in those arguments we will actually specify all the things that we will use in order to run a command, and we will specify the other functions that we will use in our program. So let's call that function start. So start right here, and what we want to pass in this function is our arguments. So in order to pass multiple arguments, select here argv, and then close the brackets, and then go basically to the function itself. But before we code the function itself, let us actually code the main part of the program, which will call this function. And in order to do that, let us just type here if --name --equals, and then under the double quotes --main. This is something that Python has, so just copy this. It is the syntax for the Python program. And then try, we will run the try and except. So we will try to run the program with the sys arguments, which is basically the arguments that we will specify in our terminal code or terminal command. And what we want to try is actually run the commands one from the and above, Now why am I using 1 and then 1 and above is basically because the first command or first actually word in our command will be the program name itself. So we do not want to parse that command as well. We only want to parse everything that comes after the program name, which will be, for example, -w or something else, or we will see. So we only want to parse the arguments that are not the name of the program, so we go from the 1 and above. Now we can run this except keyboard interrupt. So it actually stops once we interrupt with keyboard. We can print interrupted. So this is our main part of the program. Basically what we coded right now is a simple banner which will print out the simple banner for us. Then we coded if name equals main, try to start this function that we will code in the next video. In any other cases, if we actually want to stop the program, we can just press any key and it will print interrupted and it will close the program. So this is just our basic for our brute forcer. We will continue with the start function in the next video and hope I see you there. Bye. Hello everybody and welcome back to our brute forcing basic authentication part. Right now we coded a simple banner, we imported the functions and the libraries that we will need, and we also made a simple name equals main part of the program that will run our first function. Now what we want to do is we want to make this start function actually run all the other functions, so we will code everything important in the start function. Then after that we need to also make a function that will actually launch our threads, basically since we will be using threads to perform this, and then we will need to make a function which will actually check if our actual authentication was successful or not. Basically what that means is if we actually got the password right or we didn't. So let us see how we can do that. Now the first thing that we actually want to do in our start function is simple banner printing. So we want to print the banner first at every running of this. And what we want to do is basically first of all count how many arguments we actually want to have. So what do we want to have? We want to have the argument where we will specify the username. We want to have the argument where we will specify the password. We want to have the argument where we will specify the URL to the website that we are trying to brute force. In our case we will test on my router. Make sure to test on the website that you have permission to test on. And also we want to specify basically the threads option, how many threads we actually want to run. So let us see how we can do that. Basically let us try something like this. So we will run the try and accept rule right here, so try, and we will use the getopt library that we imported. So we will use two variables to store this, so opts and arguments equal getopt.getopt and then argv comma, and then between the double quotes what we want to specify is basically the letters that we will use for our arguments. So for example, let's for the user use u, for the URL let's use w, for the file which we need to store our password, so we need to make an option where we will actually pick a file for our password list. Let's use the f option, so f for file and then t for threads. So what our program will need to do, we will specify the URL with w, we'll specify the username for the brute forcing with u, the file that has passwords that we want to use for brute forcing will be f, and then the number of threads will be t. But before we actually finish this command, we need to separate them with two dots, so separate each one of them with two dots and close the brackets. So right now this should be finished, but since we ran the try command we need to accept, so we want to use the any getopt error, which we can do with this command, so accept getopt.getopt error. We just basically can print, for example, error on arguments, and then we close this, and then we can use sys.exit in order to close our program. So let us see what we did for now. Basically, what we tried, we actually gave to these two variables, we actually use the getopt library, and we set the number of things that we want to specify with our options. We set the username, file, URL, and threads, and we also printed the try and accept statement, which will actually print us error on arguments if we forget to specify some argument or something like that. Now what we want to do right now is actually specify what each of these options are. Since our code doesn't really know that we want to specify f to be a file with passwords, we need to tell that to our program. So how we can do that? We can do that simply with this. So let me just press enter. We'll do that all in the start function, so make sure to be still in the start function, and we want to use what we gave to these two variables. So for opt, we use the for loop for opt comma arg in options, or basically in opts. So basically what we used for opt and arg, which is basically variables that we do not really have. This is just variables name that I picked, and in opts, so I could have just typed here I, but it wouldn't make any sense, so let's just leave this. In opts, which is this that we set to this variable to be, we want to actually select what each of that will be. So for example, if opt equals minus u, or let's do it like this, so minus u, which is for the user, then let's say user equals arg. Now let's do that for all of these other options as well. So the next thing would be else if opt equals w or minus w, since that is how we will specify the commands. The w is for the URL, so URL will be equal to arg. Then else if option equals to minus f, or let me use the single quotes since I started everything else with the single quotes. Let's call it dictio, or however you want to call it, equals arg. You can just use dictionary or file name. So for example, let's use the pass list. Maybe that is easier for you to actually understand than dictionary. And we want to set that to also be equal to the argument. So, and else if, for the last one, opt equals, and then quotes minus t. Oops. We want to set threads to be equal to arg. So what we did right here is we specified which letter mean. So user will be minus u, URL minus w, the path list will be minus f for the file, and then minus t will be threads. So what we want to actually do right now is we want to actually first of all open the file for reading, since we can't really brute force the passwords if we do not open the file to read it. Now we will open I will just make a simple password.lix password file that we will use for this. It doesn't really matter. We will have to open it, and then we will have to code a function that will actually take an input of our passwords, threads, usernames, and URL. So let us see how we can actually do this. So all we have to do right now in this function is actually open the file. So we will do that with try and accept rule. So we actually can prompt users with an error if the file, for example, doesn't exist. If they specify the wrong name for a file, our program will crash. So we want to run the try and accept rule. So we'll just type here f equals open, and then we need to specify the name of the file to be pass list, since we specified minus f option to be equal to pass list. So make sure to name it the same right here. And all we want to do is open the file, for reading, since we will be reading from that file for our passwords. Now there is an option to read each line by line. So in Python that is called read lines. So we want the passwords variable, so passwords will be equal to f.readlines. So for example, if we have a program or a file with passwords that is basically 5 passwords long, the passwords variables will be each line of that. we need to specify that in order for our program to know that it has to use only one password while brute forcing. So let us now code the accept function. So basically we want to print can't open that file, or let us actually add this right here to be as an error. Let's also do it right here so it doesn't look like this. We will print all of the errors with the double exclamation marks, and we will print when it finds the password with the plus mark, so we can actually differentiate it. And all we want to do right now is actually call the sys.exit in order to close our program, since the user didn't specify the correct command, or pardon me, the correct program. And right now what we have to do after this, we set our options to be good, so we set all of this, we open the file, we read passwords line by line, and what we want to do now is actually launch our threads that we will use in order to brute force. So we will call a function launcher threads, or thread, which doesn't exist. We will have to code it in the next video, but for now on, let us just see what we have to pass to that function. And basically what we do have to pass is the things that we will use in our program, which is passwords. And what we want to pass to this launcher thread is basically passwords, which is basically the passwords that we read from this program right here with the option f.readLines. We also want to pass the threads, number of threads that we will use. We set that right here. We need to pass the username, or we called it user. Okay, so we called it only user, so we will need to specify user here as well. And the last thing we need to specify is the URL. Now we will code, as I said, this function in the next video. Right now we successfully coded all of these options right here. We need to code the launcher thread function in the next video, which will launch our threads, which will help us brute force our target faster. We will use the thread.start function in that from the thread library in order to do that, and then we will have to code a class that we will use in order to actually perform the attack itself. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I see you in the next one. Bye! Hello everybody and welcome back. And right now let us see what we need to specify in this launcher thread function in order for it to actually launch our threads for us. So right now what we will actually do is first of all make a def launcher.thread. So let us do that. Press here enter, make def launcher underscore thread. We need to pass the passwords, th for threads, username for usernames, and URL for URLs. Now these are not, as you know from before, these are not really variables. These are just some of the names that I will use in order to specify what actually goes to this function. What does go to this function is we specified in the previous video, and it is right here. We basically pass these 4 things to our function, which is the 4 things that we coded in our options. So right now, in order for us to actually keep a track of our threads, let us make a variable called I. It will be a global variable, since we will also use it outside of our loop. Now our variable will be a list, so we need to specify that to be with the square brackets right here. So make sure to specify I equals, and then not the normal brackets but the square brackets. And we want to append to that file 0. Whoops. What this will do is, if you know what append function does, we covered it. Oops, let me just find it. What append function does, it basically appends a certain string or something or a number to the end of the list. Now since our list is empty for now on, it will only append the 0 to our list. So right now let us use the while loop to actually see how many passwords we have in our list. So in order to do that, we know from the previous video that we set passwords to be to read lines from our file that we specify in the command. And right now we want to read those passwords for as long as they exist, for example to the end of the file. We can do that with the simple command, so while len passwords. This basically means it will read all of the passwords for the basically until it reaches the end of the password list. And now let's actually set a variable that will actually specify whether we got the password right or we got the password wrong. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to create a global variable. We can call it however we want. Let's call it hit for us. So it means when it's hit, it means we found the password. So global hit, and we will set hit to be equal to 1. Now don't set it to be equal to 1 as a number, set it to be equal to 1 as a string. So go back to your function down here, and basically all we want to do right now in our while true loop, or not while true, while length of the passwords loop, we want to first of all check if hit equals to the 1. So if we check that, if hit does equal to 1, that means we didn't find the password. Since basically if hit, we will set the hit to be equal to 0 once we actually hit the password that we actually can log into our page. So what we will do right now is we will actually check out if the number of threads is above the thread specified in the launcher functions. So for example, let's say user specifies the threads to be 5 and we only have 3 threads in our function or something like that. We want to check out that as well. But we want to do that with try and except rule, since we can always hit the keyboard interrupt, the same as we coded right here, in order to stop the program. So how can we check if the current number of threads in our I variable that we specify for our threads is smaller or bigger than the thread specified from the user with the threads option? So we can do that if I0 in our brackets is smaller than th. Now why do we use th? We use it because th is what we specify in our def launcher thread options. So if I is smaller than th, we want to type here something, a function called pop. Pass wd is the variable that will put the passwords.pop in. So you remember in the basic Python we learned what pop function does. So basically it is used for lists, as our passwords variable is actually not a variable, it is actually a list that contains all the passwords in red line by line. So what we need to do is equal passwords.pop, and then we specify 0 right here. So the next thing we want to do is if it is smaller than th, as we specified right here. Oops, first of all we need to tab this in order to belong to the if loop. We need to add another thread to this basically list called I. So let us do that. We can do that like this. So I of 0, which is the first element of our list, equals I of 0 plus 1. So this I of 0, I need to remind you, is basically referring to the first element of the list itself. And all we have to do right now is actually create a thread on a function, or basically a thread on our class that we didn't code yet, which will actually run the attack itself. So how we will call that class will be request performer. So we will run a thread. We will just call the variable to be thread equals request underscore performer. And in that thread, or basically we need to pass in that class the password, username, and the URL. So we will code the class itself in the next video, but for now on let us just pass the passwd, the username, and the URL for our request performer class. And all we have to do after that is something that we are familiar with, is start the thread itself. And since we coded the try rule, we need to add the except rule as well, and we need to join the threads at the end of this. So we will just type here except keyboard interrupt for the keyboard interrupt, and we will just print as usual interrupted. So we did 2 exclamation marks, just print here interrupted. Oops. So after that we close the program with sysexit, and we have to threads.join in order for our threads to join at the end of this function. So right now what we are left to do is actually code the class itself in our program, and we will do that in the next video, and after that we will actually test our program to see if it actually works. So let's see what we actually did for now. We made a function that will actually create all of these arguments that we specified with this command right here. So with this command right here, then it calls the launcher threads on those arguments, which will actually check out the number of threads running, and then it will call the thread to start on the class that we will code in the next video. Now we will pass the arguments of password, username and URL. So that is what we coded for now. It might be a little bit hard to understand at the beginning, but you should be good to go once we finish this. You will understand this fully. So that will be about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I see you in the next one. Bye! Hello everybody and welcome back. And in the previous video we coded the launcher thread function, which actually checks out the number of threads running, and it also starts a thread on our class request performer, which we need to actually code right now. Now that class will take an argument of thread, and we need to code the part of the code in that class which will actually run the attack itself. So we will do that up here, so let us code it right here. We will call it class request performer, and it will take the input of thread. So basically it will take an option as thread. Make sure to call it the same as you called it right here, so request performer needs to be the same name as it is right here. So all we have to do right now, as if the every class we actually code, we need to set the function in it, which will specify the variables that we will use in this class. They all need to have the prefix of self dot and then the name of the variable. So let us see how we can do that. So def underscore underscore init underscore underscore, and here we pass the self argument as in the every class, and we need to specify the three arguments that we actually passed in our request performer class, which is name, user and URL. After that, in this function we need to initiate all of these variables. So first of all we will do the thread to be thread.init, since that is the argument that the class takes itself, and we need to put the self in the brackets right here. So this is a little bit of new syntax for you, but you will get used to it. The one that we do know is the self.password. We need to set that to be name.split. Whoops. Since name actually corresponds to the password, and the user is the username that we will specify. Now you might be asking, why are we using the name.split option? Well, basically the password that we actually read from our file, they all have the /n at the end of their word. Now the /n in programming language actually represents a new line. So we need to actually split our password or our text or string or however you want to call it from that character minus or /n, which represents new line. So we can do that with the .split option, and then we can just open up the brackets and in the double quotes type here slash or \n. Then close the double quotes, and in order for our program to actually know which part of the split we want to use, whether the first or the second one, we need to specify the first one, which we can specify with the open square brackets 0. Since once you split the, let me just show you right here how that would look like. So basically you have a password called test, and then since it is having a new line, it has the characters \n. We did the split, so we split these two, and we want to select to use the first part, which is part right here. And since we know that counting in programming starts 0, we specify here test, which is basically representing this 0 right here. So let me just delete this now, so our program can actually run. And right now, since we initiated the password what to be, now we need to initiate the username. So self.username will just be user, which we specified right here. And also the self.url will be URL. And then let's print the actual the actual password that we are using currently. So let us do this with a dash, then plus self.password, for example, and then plus dash. So right now we coded the init function in our class, which is basically hosting or having our variables right here. And what we want to do is finally call the run function, which will actually run the attack itself on our target. So how can we do that? We can actually name a function, make sure that that function actually belongs to this class right here, since we will actually use the variables from here in that class. If you code the function to be right here, it will not belong to that class and we will not be able to run our program. So def run, and run will take self as an argument since it belongs to our class. And basically we need to add the global hit variable that we coded in the previous videos. Now the reason why we need to add it is because right now we will check if the global hit is equal to 0 or 1. If it's equal to 1, basically that means the password didn't work. If we get the status code of 200 for our program, which means we actually successfully loaded and logged into a page, we will set hit to be 0 and then it will terminate our program. So let me show you what I mean by that, in case you don't understand it. We just remove this selection right here. We need to select that we use the global hit command, variable, and we need to check as usual if hit equals to 1. So right now we will actually run our program itself. As I said, we need to use the requests library since it allows us to send the packet with the username and password and with the basic authentication with just one line. So right here we want to run the try and accept option as in every other basically command that we use or function that we use. And right here we will need to code our request. So let's name our request to be just R, and we use the library requests and we use .get. Now why do we use .get? Well, basically if you remember from our pursuit inspecting of our basic authentication, we were sending a get request while sending the basic authentication with username and password. That's why we here also need to use get option. So in the get option we need to specify basically two things, or three things technically. We need to specify the URL to which we are sending the packet, and we also need to specify the authentication, which will actually have the username and password in brackets. So how do we do that? Well, simply just type here the first argument or option to be self.url. We use the self, remember that we use the self because we are still in the class. And then we need to specify the authentication, so authentication right here, which will actually equal to open brackets and then self.username and also self.password. Then we close two brackets since we have two brackets open. So all we have to specify is this, and we can send, or we can actually check if the packet has received a status code of 200, which means we actually successfully loaded the page, or it didn't. So we will run a simple if-else command. So if r.statuscode, which is a function in request library that allows us to check the status code of a get request, and if it equals to 200, that means that the password is correct and that we actually guessed the password. So what we need to do is specify here hit to be 0 so we can actually terminate our code. As you remember in this part right here, in the launcher thread function, we were also checking if hit equals to 1. Now if hit equals to 0, this will not actually run anymore. So all we have to do right now is actually go back up. Let me just go and find where we stopped. So it is right here. So if hit equals to 0, we found password, so that's what we want to actually print. Oops, no, we actually, if our status code equals to 200, we set the hit to be equal to 0, and we want to print the password. So print plus password found, and then let's set that password to be basically the let's add a string to it, which will be the string of our password that we used for this current iteration of this loop. So self.password. This means we found successfully the password, and all we want to do right now is actually sys.exit. So exit the program. Else, in case our status code isn't 200, we want to run the else, and we actually want to print or let's do it like this. We can do it like this, plus self.password, plus isn't not valid. So this will basically print these two exclamation marks, then it will add our current password, and it will add also after the password is not valid. So after we check that the password isn't valid, what we want to do is actually remove the thread from the counter. And our counter is basically the I variable that we specify in the launcher thread function. So how can we do that? We can do it simply with this. So 0 equals I of 0 minus 1. The same that we specified here to adding to the counter, which was plus 1, we need to now remove it from the counter, which minus 1. And here after we try this, we need to take any exception, which we can do exception and then comma E, and then we can actually print that error in case that error shows up. So basically this is it for this program. This should actually work, I believe. In the next video we will test the program itself, and then we will actually add something else as a help option in order to print to the user our available options. So hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I see you in the next one, where we will be testing this program, and take care. Bye. Hello everybody and welcome back. And in the previous video we finished actually coding our program. Right now we should be good to go, and we should actually try to run it. So there is another thing that we actually need to add, but we can add it after we actually test the program itself and see if it actually works well. Now I will test with rogu.txt password list. You can use any password list you want. Basically right now we are not trying to actually brute force it. Right now we are trying to see if it actually works. Then after that we will specify the correct username and password in some list, and we will see if it can find the username and password that is actually correct. After that, since if I just open my program, .py, right here you can actually see that I don't have an actual function that will actually print the users what the usage of this program is, so we'll have to code that as well. But that is rather simple and not needed at the moment, so we can just run this program right now. Let me just delete the basic authentication as .py.save, since I renamed the file to be basic.py, since it is a lot less shorter. And right now we know that we can run it with this, and then we can specify all the options that we added in our program, which is -w for the URL, which will be http 192.168.1.1 for the IP address of my router. Then -u for the username. I will use anything, doesn't really matter. We will not be able to brute force it with this username, but it doesn't matter. Number of threads to be 5, and the file that we will use, let's set the path to be user share word lists, and then rogu.txt. And right now we can actually press enter and see if this will work well with our coded brute forcer. So we can see it is running through all these passwords, and we can see our program actually works well. It went through like 15 passwords right here. They are not valid, of course, and after I specified the control C, it said interrupted. Our program works good. Right now, before we actually try to actual brute force with the correct username and password, let me just restart the terminal, since it is being a little bit laggy. And let's actually add the function that will actually print the usage of this program. So nano basic authentication.py, and we can add that function right here. It doesn't really matter. What we want to do is just give the user the simple usage of this program, specification of all the commands, and a simple example of the command itself. So we can do that with several print commands, or with one print command with the three single quotes. As we saw in my backdoor creation, we can use 3 single quotes at the beginning and at the end of the string in order to specify a string that will be multi-line. Now, we do not have to do that. We can just use print option for everything. Let's use a function called usage, and we can print usage, which will be the first line. The second line can be moved like 1 tab, so -w, and then URL. And then let's specify in the brackets, for example, http somesite.com. So we specify in the brackets, we close the double quotes, we print the next usage, so -u for the username. So let us add these two so that people know that they need to separate it. So it will be username, like this. Then print the next one, so -c for the threads, I believe, yeah, threads. Close the double quotes, and the last one, or actually last option, will be -f for the file itself, so password list. Okay, so right now what we want to do is actually print the simple usage, or a simple example of using. So example could be actually basic auth.py -w for the link, so http://www.somesite.com, -u for the username, which can be admin, -t for threads, that can be 5, -f for the file with passwords, which can be pass.txt. And when we put it to be string, and we have our usage function coded in our program. Now all we have to actually do right now is actually call this function somewhere from our program. So let's see where we can add it. We need to add it right here. So as soon as we actually type the banner, we need to set a simple if-else loop, basically that will check if the usage needs to be printed out or not. So for example, if a user specifies a different number of arguments, adds some argument that doesn't exist, or doesn't use an argument that is needed, for example, they specify the URL, the username and the threads, but don't specify the password list, our program will still not work. So we need to specify at the beginning of the program, before it starts doing anything else, we need to specify whether the number of arguments is equal to 5, since we actually have 5 arguments. Now you might be asking, how do we have 5 arguments when we here only have 4? Well, basically the name of the file itself, or the program itself, is also counted as an argument, so we have to include that one too. So how can we do that? We can do that simply with this. So if length of the sys arguments is lesser than 5, basically, as I said before, 5 arguments, we will print the usage of our program. So we will call this function, which will then print this that we printed right here. So, and then the user will know what they need to specify. And then we can close the actual program, so sys.exit, and we should be good to go right now. So let us see how this will work. Everything is set. We are good to go. So let us Control O this. So Control O, then ls. Then let's say we just want to specify the URL, so http google.com. We only specify that. We just run this, and you can see we get the banner and the simple usage of the command. So right now, if the user was running this for the first time, they will right now know what to do. So let us actually test if this works. Now the username for my router is telecom, and the password is also telecom. I set that for this video, so we can see if that will work. So let me nano passwords.txt in this directory, and here we will specify some random passwords, so admin, root, administrator, password 1234 hello world. Basically we can just type here anything, including numbers, and then let's here type here telecom, then add something more, and that should be about it. So right now we have the correct password for my router right here, and we will now check out if the program itself will actually manage to find this password right here. So let me see if everything is set to go. We run the basic auth.py and we see the usage. So let us type the command -w http IP address of my router, -u, the username is telecom, -t, let's use 5 threads, and -f for the password list that we want to use, which is in my current directory, so all I have to do is specify the name of the file itself. Now if I press here enter, we can see it really fastly found the correct password. So right here you can see it went through these passwords, is not valid, and then it found password, found telecom. So we actually saw that our program works perfectly. It can find the password, it can brute force really fast using our threads, and it most likely will work in any case where you have the basic authentication protocol, or basically basic authentication on your login page. So that would be about it for this coding of our brute forcer. Now we will continue with a few more videos in the next lectures, and then we will finish up and wrap up our course. Hope you enjoyed this coding section, and I hope I see you in the next lecture. Bye!